All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something pretty wild, a theory that might just flip everything you thought you knew about the Bible completely on its head. It all comes from the work of a translator named Mauro Biglino, and it kicks off with one simple, but honestly revolutionary idea.
So here's the central question we're looking at today. What if the Bible isn't a religious book at all? I mean, what if you strip away all the interpretation and just read it literally? This theory claims that when you do that, you're not left with a story about faith, but a story about flesh and blood beings, extraterrestrials, who came here from the stars.
Okay, so the whole basis for this, the entire foundation, it rests on this one simple but really profound idea. What happens if we just ignore, for a second, all the centuries of religious interpretation and just translate the ancient Hebrew text word for word as literally as possible?
See, the argument here is that the Bibles we read today, they aren't direct translations. They're interpretations, shaped over time to fit a specific faith. And in doing that, the source material argues, we've kind of lost the original plot, which might have been describing real physical events, not just spiritual stories. All right, let's dive into this and see where it goes.
And the first place this literal reading really shakes things up is with the main character, you could say, the being, or maybe the beings, right at the very heart of the book of Genesis. Okay, let's look at the word Elohìm. Now, in most Bibles, this gets translated as God, singular. But here's the thing. In the original Hebrew, Elohim is a plural term. This theory says that if you translate it literally, it means something like the lords from above or those who descended. All of a sudden, we're not talking about one all-powerful God. We're talking about a group.
And that one change, that single word, it completely reframes the entire narrative. You go from a story of divine spiritual creation to a chronicle of powerful but very physical, technologically advanced beings who showed up on Earth.
So, okay, if the Elohim were these physical beings, then what about us? What does that do to the story of how humanity was created? Well, this is where the theory gets even more interesting.
Let's look at the text. Genesis 1:26. In this literal translation, it says, "And the Elohim said, 'Let us make man.'" Notice the plurals, us and our. The argument is that this isn't some royal we. This is a literal conversation happening between members of this group, the Elohim, as they're planning a project.
And this next part is absolutely crucial. The Hebrew word used here is tselem. Traditionally, we read that as image or likeness, but the root meaning is actually something cut off. So we weren't made in their image, like a painting. We were made with something that was physically cut off from them. And what could that possibly be? The source argues there's only one thing that makes sense: their DNA.
So this theory paints a pretty clear picture. Step 1, the Elohim, who the source connects to the Anunnaki from Sumerian myths, show up and they need workers, probably for mining. Step 2, they find a native hominid species that's already here on Earth. Step 3, this is the big one, they mess with the hominid's genes, splicing in their own DNA, that's Tselem. And finally, step 4, a new hybrid is born, Adam, which literally means the earthly one, designed to be a servant.
Okay, so if we were genetically engineered, what about all the miracles and divine events in the Bible? Well, this literal interpretation keeps going, and it suggests that many of these things weren't divine phenomena at all, but descriptions of advanced technology. Take the glory of God. Sounds pretty spiritual, right? But the original Hebrew word, kavod, its root meaning is heavy, tough, powerful thing. So the book argues this wasn't some kind of glowing spiritual aura. It was something physically heavy and powerful. Maybe a machine, or even a vehicle.
And maybe the best example to back this up comes from the prophet Ezekiel's famous vision. Instead of a mystical experience, this theory presents it as a pretty detailed eyewitness account of a flying vehicle coming in for a landing.
I mean, just look at the details Ezekiel gives us. He talks about a storm wind coming from a specific direction, a giant cloud with flashing fire inside it, a core that looked like glowing metal, wheels that could move without turning, a noise so loud it was like rushing water. And get this, figures inside that looked like an atom, like pilots. You put all that together, and it starts to sound a lot less like a vision and a whole lot more like a very sophisticated aircraft.
All right, this literal, non-spiritual reading doesn't stop with technology. It goes right to the very foundation of Judeo-Christian law, the Ten Commandments.
And this is a big one. The book asks a really challenging question here. Were the 10 Commandments that we all know and learn, were they actually the words that were written on those stone tablets?
So, according to the source, if you look closely at the text in Exodus 34, the Bible explicitly lists the words of the covenant that were written on the second set of tablets. And they're not the moral code we're familiar with, like don't murder or don't steal. Instead, it's a list of very specific, almost contractual rules. Things like break down their altars, keep the feast of unleavened bread, and, don't boil a young goat in its mother's milk. The claim is that this was the real deal, the actual contract.
And that brings us to the final point. And honestly, this might be the most paradigm-shifting claim of them all in this entire interpretation.
So if these beings, the Elohim, were physical, made of flesh and blood, does that mean they could also die? Were they mortal? The book says yes, and it points to one specific, shocking passage in the Bible to prove it.
Check this out. This is from Psalm 82, translated literally. I have said that you are Elohim. You too will certainly die like an Adam, and like one of the heads you will fall. So the source presents this as one Elohim speaking to the others, basically telling them, hey, don't get too cocky. Even though we have all this power and live for a long time, in the end we're going to die just like the humans we created.
So, if the Bible really is describing physical, mortal beings who created humanity through genetic engineering, then what is it? I mean, what does that make the Bible? This whole interpretation recasts it. It's not a holy book of faith, but a historical record, a chronicle of humanity's first encounter with its powerful, technologically advanced, and very, very mortal creators. It's a wild thought, and it leaves you wondering, what else have we been misreading all this time?